Alright guys, welcome back to my channel. I am doing an article review. This one is from the New York Times. It's called Fat Talks, an investigation and a reckoning, how collegiate runners force reform. So this is from New York Times just this month, and it's about a bunch of collegiate runners at Wesleyan College. Wesleyan College is in Massachusetts, Connecticut, somewhere up there. In the New England states. And back in 2015, a bunch of collegiate runners signed a letter saying that their running coach, I think his name is Crook, his last name is Crook, forced them to fat talks. I don't know what these fat talks entailed, but they were private discussions that he had with his runners about gaining weight. So I'm going to read the first part here. In early March, 36 Wesleyan University track alumni signed a letter describing a culture of rampant body shaming and eating disorders. So this happened back in the early 2010s, and now they're just signing the letter. So what I don't know is why they waited this long to sign the letter. Anyway, they said the coach, John Crook, had held fat talks with runners, telling them to lose weight to run faster. There is an element of truth to this, that when you weigh less, you run faster, to an extent. So if you can imagine a graph, so you have, so weight is down here and then performance is up here. If you weigh too little, your performance suffers. If you gain a little bit of weight, a little bit of muscle mass, then your performance improves. If you gain too much weight, your performance declines. So there's an optimum here. Okay? Not too little, not too hot. It's kind of like Goldilocks. Not too cold, not too hot. Because if you weigh too much, then you run slower. And this is true. If you look at the leanest runners, or the fastest runners, they're always lean. Okay, so the more weight you gain, the slower you run. Okay, but if you're anorexic, you don't weigh enough, you're like 90 pounds, you're not going to weigh fast enough. So that's kind of the trick with these kind of sports. Whether it's running, swimming, cycling, gymnastics, any sport really, that's weight dependent, you're going to be, how do I say, you're going to be tempted to eat less, because less food means less weight, and then you can perform better, but only to an extent. Anyway, so a lot of this article goes into kind of like the investigation. I'm not going to talk too much about that, because we don't really, well, we do know what the results were. They said he hadn't done anything wrong. Okay, and now he's the head of some department that is tackling this issue. So it's kind of ironic. So this running coach, John Crook, creates this problem, and then the university, or the college, university, I should say, appoints him to head this program to tackle the problem that he created. Anyway, many runners developed eating disorders and needed treatment. Now this is important. Many still struggle with their relationship with food and body image today. Well, I talk about this a lot. I don't think I mentioned this in a video, but I talk about vestigial habits. And so vestigial habits are those habits that last long after the eating disorder. And the thing is, it doesn't take that long to develop an eating disorder. It takes much longer to get rid of it. Okay, so it's kind of like this, and then it takes a long time. And so a lot of these women who went to school 2012, 2013, 2014, they're still dealing with it. And unless they get the right help, whether it's a coach or a therapy, they're going to struggle with it for a while. Okay, and they still struggle with body image, and they still struggle with the relationship with food. That sucks. I mean, this is like 5 or 6 years later, they're still dealing with this. And this will always be a scar on their life, because my ED is almost defined my 20s. Now, I can't remember my 20s without remembering my ED. It's kind of tragic in a sense. A lot of good things happen, but this will always be a scar in that time of my life. The university announced that it had begun an investigation on March 2nd, the same day that the letter was published, in an email. They said that they didn't initially demand that Crook be fired. They asked for sweeping changes to how coaches and administrators treat student athletes and respond to red flags. So he was asking them to have food diaries, and then he would look at these food diaries. He wasn't qualified to do that. And what was he going to tell them? Oh, you should eat less. Instead of having a bowl of oats, have a couple of rice cakes. I mean, what was he telling them? That's what I want to know. Of course, these fat talks were private, of course, because He didn't want anybody to say anything. So I'm just interested to know what was said. I don't know why the runners haven't told us that. Anyway, I can only tell you what's in the article. The letter was not to disparage our coach, but rather shed a light on a highly toxic culture that continues to damage women long after they have left the program. So again, it's these vestigial habits. And I made a video before about the long-term effects of eating disorders, and there are a lot of them. And again, you can develop an ED relatively quickly. It takes a while to get rid of it. Okay, that's kind of what sucks about it. So they did a review of all information and interviews with 50 alumni. The experiences with Coach Crook were extremely personal and varied widely. And then they tasked him with engaging with the current athletes to discuss the next steps. That's kind of the irony here, is that he created this coach, John Crook, created the problem, and now he's in charge of fixing it. So one undergraduate said there needs to be an outside body requiring them to make the changes specific to our demands, specified in our demands. Okay, there's a lot of stuff in here about the investigation. I'm not going to go too much into that. I just want to talk about the EDs and behaviors. Claire Palmer, a 2014 graduate, said she remembers learning of the fat talks from more senior teammates during her first semester, but the coach wouldn't give that talk to first-year students. Wonder why. I'm just kind of interested why. And I still want to know what these fat talks were about, because what he needed to do was get a nutritionist or a dietitian to talk to these girls. That's what he needed, or young women, I should say, to talk about it. And I think that the problem is we allow these young people, these young adults, to play these sports, and we don't tell them about the risks. And what are the risks? The risks are developing an ED that lasts much longer after graduation. We don't tell them that. We just kind of push them into these programs. We don't provide them the right resources, the nutritionist, the dietitian. And I know I have talked about dietitians in previous videos, and I'm not anti-dietitian. I actually think dietitians could serve a really good use here. Warning these athletes about the potential risks and how they need to feed themselves optimally for performance. Too little is, if they eat too little, they're not going to perform. If they eat too much, they're not going to perform. How can they eat just right? There's that narrow band, and how many 18 or 19-year-olds know how to eat right? They don't teach it in school. I didn't know anything when I was 18 or 19. Anyway, let's see. So Brianna Parsons, another 2014 graduate. Remember, a lot of this happened back in the early 2010s. Said she was brought into Crook's office in her first year and was asked to lose weight to improve her race times. So again, if you want to race fast, you have to be lean. The fastest runners in the world are lean. Okay, I can guarantee you, if you look at the winners of marathons, they're lean. They don't weigh 160, 170 pounds. They're probably I don't know, if you're talking about a male athlete, 5'6", 5'7", and they weigh 150 pounds. Okay, that's pretty lean for 5'7". Crook told Parsons to write down everything she was eating and review the journals with him. Keep the discussions private, because it would cause people distress and worry. No, it would harm his reputation, is what it would do. It would make him look bad. Palmer spoke to the athletic director in 2012. While her weight had not been addressed by the coach, she felt responsible to speak up on behalf of her teammates. She said they asked her what she wanted to change in her relationship with the coach. When Palmer said she was not concerned about her relationship with coach, the meeting came to a close. All right, whatever. I was trying to bring to light a cultural systemic problem. I don't know what she means by this. She says it down here. I will go... Okay, actually a little farther. Cultural, systemic, all right there. I don't know what she's talking about there. Is she talking about fatphobia? Is she talking about, I don't know, is she talking about Wesleyan, per se? I mean, what is she talking about? Is she talking about the, like the stigma against fat people? When runners are told to drop weight, they can quickly. Yes, they can, and that is a danger. See, here's the thing. We want these young athletes to perform, but we don't tell them how to do it. We just tell them to work hard, and if you weigh too much, eat less. Okay, that's insufficient advice. That's not good advice. That's actually very damaging. And when you're 21, 22, you can drop weight pretty fast, even if you're a girl. Now, that's always a temptation. And so that's another thing, that if you're going to be a collegiate athlete, you need to understand these risks. And one of the risks is developing an ED. because you want to perform, but you don't want to weigh too much. And so what's the temptation? Just to stop eating. Now, how do you expect to perform? I don't know. But everybody knows that if you stop eating, you lose weight. And so that's going to be a temptation for a lot of these athletes. But they're not warned about it when they're 18 or 19. I certainly was not warned about it. I was not a collegiate athlete in college, but I started taking up triathlon, and I started running and doing all these endurance sports. And nobody told me about these dangers. Nobody. Okay, I went into it without knowing the risks. Anyway, they can quickly and dangerously find themselves lacking the energy required to maintain their health. Yeah, there's the problem. They quote Dr. Ackerman. She is the director of the Female Athlete Program at Boston Children's Hospital. She pointed to relative energy deficiency in sports. This is kind of interesting. I've never heard of this. Relative, it's kind of a clunky name. Oops, sorry. Go down. Where is it? Yeah, well, you don't really need to see it, but... Oh, here it is right here. Relative energy deficiency in sports. A common syndrome in female runners marked by a loss of period, low bone density, disordered eating, and debilitating injuries. So it all goes together. If you lose too much fat, you stop producing hormones. Stop producing hormones, you stop having your period if you're a lady. You stop producing fat, and you don't produce bone. You don't replace bone cells as fast. And you lose too much fat, you get really hungry. Then you have disordered eating. It's all connected. Actually, the physiology of fat is really interesting, by the way. But that's a different discussion. So they lose fat. They start breaking bones because they don't have that cushion, and the bones are less dense than they were. People are not unidimensional, said Dr. Paula Quattromoni, an associate professor in nutrition at Boston University. She talks about the intersection of sports nutrition and eating disorders. I should get her on this channel. That would be interesting to talk about. People are not unidimensional. Exactly, But again, it's like we send these young adults to college. We don't tell them how to study. We don't tell them anything about student debt. We don't tell them anything about EDs. We just push them into college and say, hey, hope it works out for you. I think that's... it's not dishonest. It's irresponsible is what it is. We're telling them to go into these sports, and then they develop an eating disorder, and then it's like, oh, what do we do now? It's much easier to prevent one than it is to fix it. Okay, but if you already have one, then you're watching the right channel. Anyway, that's all there is here. The rest of the stuff is just the details on the investigation. I'm not going to go into that. I'll put a link in the description box for you to read. If you're a collegiate athlete, let me know in the comments below. I'd like to hear your experiences, or if you were a collegiate athlete, let me know, because you don't want to end up like her. What's her name? Yuki Hebner. Interesting. She looks pretty good, by the way. But you don't want to end up like her, 27, 28, and you're still dealing with an ED that you develop when you're 21, 22. It's like you're paying interest for 7 or 8 years. You lose weight, you perform a little better, but now you have these long-term effects, and you don't know how to deal with it. So I hope she's well. I hope all these athletes are well, but if they're not, they need to get a coach, they need to get a therapist. They're not hard to find. Okay, I'm one of them. I can help them. Anyway, yeah, let me know what you think in the comments below, and thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next article review. And don't forget to subscribe and check out some of my free resources in the description box below. All right, good night. Bye.